Hello everyone, greetings. I'm Dr. L. Santosh Kumar, Assistant Professor of English at Kusajayanti College, Autonomous, Bengaluru. And today I'm here to deliver a talk on home versus homelessness in the context of postcolonial discourses. And let me share my PPT first. Yeah, in the present scenario, we all of us talk about the idea of literature, how it is being interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. And most importantly, when we talk about the element of literariness in a text or the idea of ideological construction of a literary text is being reinterpreted, and most importantly, each and every literary scholar in the contemporary times is expected to traverse the unheard binaries of a literary text. And most importantly, in the contemporary times, as per the advent of cultural studies, which bridges the gap between unknown and known, and most importantly, cultural studies is an umbrella term which connects people from various domains. And the world today is evolving towards the concept of interdisciplinarity and multidisciplinarity of a text. And all these ideologies or all these ideas are now being reinterpreted. And most importantly, they give a new shape to literature. And most importantly, a famous scientist called Thomas Kuhn, the man who coined this particular term called paradigm shift in his principal work titled Anatomy of Structures. In that particular work, he talks about the concept of paradigm shift is not something which is applicable only to the scientific discourses, whereas it's even applicable to the humanistic discourses. And most importantly, he stresses on how literature is trying to eliminate the gaps. And most importantly, those gaps are the unifying forces which creates a pivotal force. And most importantly, they tend to draw a line between personal and political. And if you look at here, this particular slide, here you could understand how the term conflict is being conflictualized in literary discourses. Because people here, they often assume or they often think that each and every solution or each and every problem, most importantly, first we are supposed to talk about a problem, then only you think about a solution. But we are living in a world which is highly fragmented, where people in the contemporary times first they think about a solution and then they talk about a problem. So this is one of the most pioneering and a disturbing force which makes the entire humanity to be dismantled like anything else. And the term conflict is something which is to be highlighted. And most importantly, when any individual, he or she, when they talk about their conflictual ideologies or when they talk about their conflictual mentalities, by default, it is quite evident for each and everyone to understand how these discourses or how these ideologies are being bridged. And also at the same time, it is quite quintessential to understand these terminologies. Because why do we say that it's quite quintessential to understand these terminologies is that literary discourses in the contemporary times, they ensure that the literariness of a text is being a backdrop, whereas history of a particular problem or history of a particular event is something which is being foregrounded. And it is a well-known fact right from the good old past until now, most of the history books they have been written only from a centered perspective. And centered here, it refers to the power structure. To put in other words, we call that as institutionalized policies. And none of the history books in the good old past, they have spoken about the plight of the collective individuals. So in the contemporary times, all these voices or all these ideologies are being revamped. And most importantly, we are supposed to know about this particular concept called historiography. And according to historians, the historiography is said to be the process or the art of involved in compiling or writing a history. So when all these discourses are being made known to us, it is quite evident that literary discourses, to a greater extent, they always attack history and historiographies. The reason why these writers, or why the people who speak literary domain, they attack history and historiographies, is that their main agenda is to make people to be aware of the power structures which operates owing to political monopolization, which is creating a rampant discourse at various levels. And most importantly, when we talk about the term post-colonialism, we are supposed to understand there is the term post itself has got three meanings. The first one is after, and second one is humanity, and third one is analysis. And how these three terms they create a paradigm shift. And people they often think that the term post is something which has become a synonymous in theoretical discourses. It is not like that. Literary theory in general, they tend to make the readers to think out of the box, and which in the contemporary times people use the Edward de Bono's lateral thinking. Literary theory, most importantly, it makes the reader not to restrict to a particular text, and most importantly, to put in the words of Peter Barry, who often claimed the fact by saying that truth is meaningless, knowledge is contingent. So if we go by his particular ideology, or if we look at his own conceptualization of this particular term theory, or if we go by the words of famous post-colonialist Franz Fanon, who said that don't call me a nigger, being a psychiatrist when he was walking in the streets of America, since he was being labeled as by his identity by a small chap. So all these conflictual ideologies, when they are being addressed in literature, by default, it paves way for two things. First one is that it makes the conflict known to the world, and second thing, it puts an end to all sort of ideological constructs and conflicts. And second most important thing here, which we are supposed to understand here, is that when we talk about when we talk about post-colonial literature, people they often think that there is an element of conflict or protest, and people they often try to assume, or they often try to believe the fact that there is no such difference between conflict literature and protest literature, whereas differences are more in number, and we as an academia should be aware of. And when we talk about conflict literature, the conflict literature is a text or is a literary genre which presents the voices of the muted community. For example, if an individual, he or she, if they write about the sufferings of unheard voices of the world or from India, those particular texts are said to be the conflict literature. And second thing is that literature of protest or protest literature. And when we look onto this particular terminology, we should understand that protest literature, it goes with the sayings of Edward Said, who firmly believed that there is no clash between civilizations, whereas there is only clash between ideologies. So when we look at the element of protest in literature or literature of protest, it is something, an element of testimonial. And it's a well-known fact that testimonial literature is derived from the word testimonio, which means witness narrative. And this particular theoretical discourse, it had its origin in Latin America, where the people in the Latin America, they protested against the patriarchal norms of the government. So later, this particular theory, it became a socio-political tool. And most importantly, to put in the words of John Beverley, one of the pioneer for testimonial, who often claimed by saying that the best way to learn subaltern is through testimonial literature. And a famous person called George Kugelberger, who has explained the fact by saying that testimonialista, that is, the writers of testimonial, they are supposed to be labeled as testimonialista. A testimonialista can explain his or her own personal testimonial by directly or indirectly addressing a specific interlocutor. When a victim, when he or she writes about a particular socio-political cause, or when they talk about their own traumatization, or when they talk about their own suppression, all those ideologies or all those constructs are supposed to be labeled as literature of protest and protest literature. And most importantly, first of all, we should understand the important aspect is that in the good old past, there was no such conflict between home was homelessness. Of course, it was there. And you would be wonder how come this particular man is just changing his words or statement. In the good old past, the concept of home was homelessness. It was applicable to the people who are away from their own homeland and expressing or experiencing homelessness in someone's land is something a routine phenomenon which had been happening for so many years. Whereas in the current contemporary discourses, people they often feel that even in their own homeland they undergo homelessness. And to put it in the words of Martin Heidegger, who said that homelessness is coming to be the destiny of the world. So just imagine and see how the ideological construct and most importantly the natives of their own soil they are something who are supposed to be identified, and most importantly even they themselves they undergo the concept of homelessness or marginalities to a greater extent. And why it's happening, what would be the reason? And if we look at the country like Australia, and for that each and every country has got a synchronic name. For example, when we address our country or when we address our country India, by default saying it's a motherland. Same thing when we address the particular nation Australia, the natives of the Australia they have labeled their country as terra nullius, and the meaning of that particular term terra nullius is no man's land. So when we look at the history of Australia, it is a group of Americans or a group of England who fled away. And most importantly, when you look at the history of America, we all know a group of people who fled away from England. They settled at Australia. Same thing with Australia, who settled at America. Sorry. Same thing when you look at the history of Australia, a group of people of England who fled away and they established their colonies there. And most importantly, each and every king in the British Empire they wanted to become an empire. So this has become the order of the day in the good old past. So the moment when they occupied or colonized a particular land, they ensured that the natives of that particular landscape they should undergo the cultural assimilation. And most important, when they undergo a cultural assimilation, by default they sensitize or they experience the concept of hybridization. Being hybrid in the contemporary times has become a usual one, whereas in the good old past, being hybrid was something considered to be a sin. And the reality, and the reality in the contemporary time is that being hybrid initially it was a norm, and now it became a mode. And why do all these things happen? Why do the concept of hybridization, or why do postcolonial voices, or why do postcolonial writers they attack all these political constructs? Is that each and everything which is being taught or which is being told to them are being produced to them in the form of books. And most importantly, it's the painful and the saddest truth is that books are said to be the repository of cultures which will keep the wounds alive. Whereas in the context of postcolonial literature, these books they have constructed a false history. And most importantly, when we look at Edward Said's Orientalism, he has said that travelogues, travel writings, they are one of the pioneering facts in order for a colonizer to understand about the construction of a particular text. And more specifically, people like Columbus and Vasco da Gama, when they explored a continent or country like America, whatever perception they had about that particular country or continent, they have recorded in a form of a book, and they've also recorded in the form of their diary writings or travelogues. And all those histories and all those ideologies are manipulated by the power structures owing to their personal welfare. So it is something history versus ideology, which has been a long debate for so many years, but yet then people are trying to eradicate these bridges. But the supreme irony is that the element of subversion and containment, both these ideologies are something being state sponsored. So when this is going to be the order of the day, by default, these postcolonial critics These postcolonial writers, they always talk about the falsified truths and histories. And most importantly, why do truths are being at a stake? Why do truths are being questioned? And the simple and the very logical reason behind it is that when someone's history is being retold to them by a third person, at that time history and historiography is being problematized. A native's history or a native explaining about his or own history has got more original truths than a third person explaining the someone's history as their own history. So historiography and falsified truths are something most important terms which are supposed to be analyzed, relearned and unlearned by each and every literary scholar so that the element of literature is something is being problem is not being problematized. And most importantly, I would like to conclude my talk by saying that when we talk about literature in the contemporary times, we all of us should understand is that literature is said to be culture-specific production. And when we use the word, when we use this particular word culture, we are supposed to understand this important scenario is that cultural studies is said to be a broad and comprehensive term which includes literature, anthropology, economics, politics, social sciences, and so on. And after the advent of cultural studies, the gap between anthropologists and the humanistic scholars have been bridged. So, thus begins the interdisciplinary approach to knowledge. I would like to conclude my presentation by saying that the more we talk about history, the more we talk about the original truths, by default, we are doing justice to postcolonial readers and to the postcolonial criticism, which is the quite need of the hour. Thank you.